The starship Silverwind tumbled through space like a dying bird with broken wings, and Kalith Moonwhisper gripped the controls with hands that shook from exhaustion and fear. She had been flying for 3 days without sleep, and her elven body was reaching its limits, even though her kind could endure far more than most species. The ship groaned around her as another system failed, and red warning lights painted her pale face in crimson shadows. In the cargo hold below her feet, Veyrath lay dying. The dragon who had been her companion for 2 centuries now barely clung to life, and their telepathic bond had faded to a whisper. She could feel his pain like needles in her mind, and the poison that coursed through his massive body. The Voidborn had struck them during a reconnaissance mission, and their weapons carried toxins that no elven medicine could cure. Kalith had 1 chance and 1 chance only. The human colony called New Terra orbited a star 3 hours ahead, and she had heard rumors that humans had fought the Voidborn before. Her people dismissed humans as primitive newcomers to the galactic stage, but desperation had no room for pride. If anyone knew how to counter Voidborn poison, it would be the species crazy enough to have survived an encounter with them. The console before her flickered and died, and she slammed her fist against it in frustration. The backup systems kicked in, but they would only last another hour at most. She sent out a distress signal in the human language and hoped someone was listening. Her High Council would be furious if they knew where she was going. Elves did not ask humans for help. Elves did not ask anyone for help. But Veyrath was dying, and that changed everything. Commander Lisa Martinez sat in the command center of Terran Defense Station Gamma and stared at the signal that had just appeared on her screens. Her second officer stood beside her, with his arms crossed and a frown on his face. The signature was not human, and not any of the species they usually dealt with. The ship was small and clearly in distress based on the erratic flight pattern. Lisa made her decision in seconds. She had not risen to command by being cautious, and something about this situation felt important. She ordered her crew to prepare for an incoming vessel and alerted medical that they might have injured passengers. The station hummed to life around her as people moved to their positions. Amy Foster grabbed her medical kit and ran toward the docking bay. The call had come through minutes ago, and her team was already setting up emergency equipment. She had no idea what kind of alien they were receiving, but her job was to help anyone who needed it. That was why she had become a doctor in the first place. The ship that limped into view made Amy stop and stare. It was beautiful, even in its damaged state, with elegant curves and what looked like silver metal that seemed to glow with its own light. She had never seen anything like it, and for a moment she forgot to breathe. Then the ship lurched sideways and nearly crashed into the station wall, and she remembered that someone inside needed help. Kalith brought the Silverwind into the docking bay with the last of her strength. The ship scraped against the floor and sparks flew, but she managed to stop it before hitting anything vital. She sat back in her chair and let out a breath she did not know she had been holding. They had made it. Barely. She tried to stand, but her legs would not cooperate. 3 days without sleep and the mental strain of keeping Veyrath alive had drained her completely. She heard footsteps outside the ship and voices speaking in the human language. Her translator implant kicked in, and she heard them talking about medical assistance and potential hazards. They sounded concerned rather than hostile, and that was something. The hatch opened, and Lisa Martinez stepped inside with 2 armed guards behind her. She saw the elven woman slumped in the pilot seat, and her eyes widened. She had heard of elves, but had never seen one in person. The woman was tall and thin with silver hair and eyes that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. She wore armor that was scorched and dented, and there was blood on her face. Lisa held up her hands to show she was not a threat. She spoke slowly and clearly. She told Kalith that they were here to help and asked if there were others on board. Kalith tried to answer, but her voice came out as a croak. She pointed weakly toward the cargo hold and managed one word: dragon. Amy pushed past Lisa and knelt beside Calith. She pulled out a scanner and ran it over the elven woman while asking questions about injuries and symptoms. Calith struggled to focus on the words. She kept trying to say that she was fine and that the dragon needed help, but Amy was not listening. The human doctor was already working and giving orders to her team. Then the station shook and alarms started blaring. Lisa grabbed her radio and demanded a status report. The answer came back immediately. There was a massive energy surge coming from the cargo hold, and it was building fast. Whatever was down there was waking up, and it was not happy. Katie Morgan was in the engineering bay when the alarms went off. She pulled up the readings, and her eyes went wide. The energy signature was unlike anything in their database, and it was growing exponentially. If it continued at this rate, it would overload the station power grid in minutes. She started rerouting power and shutting down non-essential systems, but it was like trying to stop a flood with a bucket. In the cargo hold, Veyrath opened his eyes. The dragon had been dreaming of fire and stars and the ancient days when his kind ruled the skies of 1,000 worlds. Now he woke to pain and the smell of strange metals and stranger beings. His body screamed in agony as the poison continued its work, and his instincts told him to fight. Energy crackled around him as his power surged out of control. Amy heard the reports coming over the radio and made a decision that would have gotten her fired under normal circumstances. She left her team to stabilize Calith and ran toward the cargo hold. Lisa shouted after her to stop, but Amy kept running. She had heard the word dragon, and she had seen the bio readings. She knew what void-born poison did to living beings because humans had studied it after their own encounter with that terrible enemy. She reached the cargo hold door, and it was glowing red-hot from the energy inside. She could hear a sound like thunder mixed with a scream, and she knew the dragon was dying. She also knew that if she opened that door, she might die too. But she had not become a doctor to stand safely on the sidelines. Amy typed her override code into the door panel, and it slid open. Heat and light blasted out, and she raised her arm to shield her face. Through the glare, she saw him. Veyrath was enormous with scales that shifted between gold and red, and eyes like molten metal. He was magnificent and terrifying, and clearly in terrible pain. She stepped forward with her hand outstretched. She spoke in a calm voice, even though her heart was racing. She told him that they were going to help him, and that he was safe now. She did not know if he could understand her words, but she hoped he could sense her intent. Behind her, she heard Lisa and the guards arriving, but she did not turn around. Her focus was entirely on the dying dragon before her. Veyrath looked at the small human female who dared to approach him. He could sense her fear, but also her determination and something else. Compassion. It had been a very long time since anyone had looked at him with compassion rather than fear or greed. His power flickered and began to fade as curiosity overcame pain. Amy took another step closer. She was close enough now to touch him, and she could see the wounds on his body and the darkness spreading under his scales where the poison worked. She pulled out her scanner and began taking readings while talking in that same calm voice. She told him about the treatment they had developed after fighting the Voidborn and how they had saved 3 soldiers who had been poisoned. She promised him that they would do everything they could. Veyrath made a sound that was almost a purr. This human was either very brave or very foolish, but he found he did not care which. She was trying to help, and that was more than his own kind had offered. He let his power drain away completely and lowered his massive head to the floor. The energy surge stopped and the alarms fell silent. Lisa stood in the doorway with her mouth open. She had just watched her chief medical officer walk up to a dragon like it was a sick puppy, and somehow that had worked. She made a mental note to either promote Amy or have her evaluated for insanity. Possibly both. Katie arrived with her engineering team and equipment. She took one look at the dragon and started calculating how much power they would need to keep him alive during treatment. The numbers were not encouraging, but she had never backed down from a challenge. She ordered her people to start setting up a medical support grid around the cargo hold. In the medical bay, Kalith regained consciousness to find herself on a human bed with monitoring equipment attached to her body. A young nurse sat nearby and smiled when she saw Kalith was awake. The nurse explained that the dragon was being treated and that the doctor was with him now. Kalith tried to get up, but her body refused to cooperate. The nurse gently pushed her back down and told her to rest. Kalith closed her eyes and reached out with her mind. She found Veyrath and relief flooded through her. He was weak but alive, and the pain had lessened. Through their bond, she felt his curiosity about the humans, and especially about the female doctor who showed no fear. Kalith sent him reassurance and love, and then she let herself fall into the first real sleep she had had in days. Amy worked through the night with her team. They administered the antidote they had developed and monitored Veyrath closely for any reactions. The dragon remained calm and even seemed to be helping by keeping his body temperature stable and his breathing steady. It was like he understood what they were trying to do and was cooperating. As dawn broke over New Terra, Amy sat against the cargo hold wall and watched the dragon sleep. His breathing was easier now, and the dark patches under his scales had started to fade. They were not out of danger yet, but for the first time she felt hopeful. She had saved him. They had saved him. Lisa found her there an hour later. The commander sat down beside Amy and they watched the dragon together in silence. Finally, Lisa spoke. She said that they had made first contact with an elven vessel and saved a dragon, and it was not even breakfast time yet. She asked Amy if this was going to become a regular thing. Amy laughed and said she certainly hoped not. But as she looked at Veyrath sleeping peacefully, she felt something shift inside her. This was the beginning of something important, and she knew her life would never be the same. Kalith woke to the sound of voices and the smell of something strange cooking. She opened her eyes and found herself in a human medical facility with white walls and bright lights. Her armor had been removed and she wore a simple medical gown. For a moment panic seized her, but then she felt Veyrath in her mind, and the panic faded. He was alive. They were both alive. A nurse noticed she was awake and called for Amy. The doctor arrived within minutes with a datapad in her hands and a smile on her face. Amy explained that Kalith had been unconscious for 18 hours and that her body had been severely depleted. The elven woman needed rest and food and time to recover. She also said that Veyrath was doing much better and the antidote was working. Kalith asked to see him and Amy hesitated. The dragon was still in the cargo hold and moving him would be dangerous. But Kalith insisted and finally Amy agreed. They would take her to him in a wheelchair because she was still too weak to walk. Kalith hated the idea of appearing weak in front of humans, but she wanted to see Veyrath more than she cared about pride. The cargo hold had been transformed. Human medical equipment surrounded Veyrath, and several technicians monitored displays showing his vital signs. Katie Morgan stood on a platform she had built to reach the dragon and was checking some kind of power coupling. She waved at Kalith as the wheelchair rolled in. Veyrath opened one eye when he sensed Kalith nearby. Through their bond, she felt his relief and affection, and something else. Curiosity. He was fascinated by the humans and their strange methods. They treated him not as a weapon or a monster, but as a patient who deserved care. It was a new experience for a dragon who had lived 10,000 years. Amy watched Kalith and Veyrath together and saw the obvious bond between them. She had read about elven dragon riders in the historical databases, but seeing it in person was different. The love between them was clear, and it made Amy more determined to save them both. She explained the treatment plan and how they would need to continue the antidote for several more days. Over the next week, Kalith recovered her strength and learned about human culture through observation. She watched the station crew work together with an efficiency that surprised her. They shared meals in a common area and laughed together and seemed to genuinely care about each other. It was very different from the formal hierarchies of elven society. Katie brought her daughter Sophie to visit one day. The little girl was 5 years old with bright eyes and no fear at all. She marched right up to Veyrath and announced that he was pretty. Then she climbed onto his foreleg before anyone could stop her and started telling him about her stuffed animals. Kalith waited for Veyrath to react with annoyance, but instead the ancient dragon made a sound like a chuckle and listened patiently. Sophie brought her stuffed animals the next day and arranged them around Veyrath so he would not be lonely. She brought a teddy bear and a stuffed rabbit and something she called a unicorn. She explained very seriously that the unicorn was magic and would help him feel better. Veyrath accepted the gifts with grave dignity, and Kalith saw Amy trying not to laugh. But Kalith also noticed other things. The station was small, and the crew worked long hours. They did not have the advanced technology of her people, and many of their systems seemed primitive. Yet they made it work through ingenuity and determination. Katie could fix anything with whatever material she had available. Amy could treat injuries with limited supplies. Lisa made command decisions with confidence born from experience, rather than centuries of tradition. One evening, Lisa invited Kalith to dinner in her quarters. It was a casual meal with simple food, but Lisa wanted to talk. She asked Kalith why she had really come to New Terra and what was happening in elven space. Kalith had been trained to deflect such questions, but something about Lisa made her want to tell the truth. She explained that she was a scout sent to evaluate human military capabilities. The Voidborn were returning, and the Elven Dominion needed to know who their neighbors were and whether they could be useful. She did not mention that the elves were losing the war badly or that her people were too proud to ask for help directly. But Lisa was perceptive and seemed to understand what was not being said. Lisa asked what Kalith thought of humans now that she had spent time among them. Kalith considered the question carefully. She said that humans were resourceful and brave and surprisingly compassionate. They had saved her and Veyrath without asking for anything in return, and that was rare in the galaxy. Lisa smiled and said that was just what neighbors did for each other. The conversation was interrupted by an urgent call from the command center. Lisa left immediately, and Kalith followed, despite her protests. Something was happening, and Kalith needed to know what. They reached the command center to find the crew gathered around a display showing an incoming signal. It was a coded message from the Elven Dominion addressed to Kalith. The message was brief and cold. She was ordered to return immediately with her intelligence report. She was to abandon the dragon if he could not travel, and she was forbidden from revealing the true situation to the humans. The Dominion would rather face extinction than accept help from lesser species. The message ended with a reminder that disobedience would result in exile and disgrace. Kalith felt something crack inside her. She had served her people loyally for 200 years. She had fought their wars and followed their orders without question. But this was too much. Veyrath was not some piece of equipment to be abandoned. He was her friend and companion, and he deserved better. Lisa read the message and her face hardened. She asked Kalith what she was going to do. Kalith did not know. If she defied the Dominion, she would lose everything. Her rank, her home, her family. She would be branded a traitor and hunted. But if she obeyed, she would condemn billions of lives, including humanity, to possible destruction. Amy arrived and read the message over their shoulders. She was furious. She said that anyone who would order someone to abandon an injured friend was not worth following. Kalith appreciated the sentiment, but Amy did not understand. The Dominion was not just her government. It was her entire society and culture and way of life. Defying them meant becoming an outcast with nowhere to go. Veyrath had been listening through their bond, and now he sent her a vision. He showed her the future if she obeyed. The elves fighting alone and losing world after world. Humanity discovering the void-born threat too late and falling before they could mount a defense. Billions dying because pride prevented cooperation when it mattered most. The vision was so vivid that Calith gasped. Then Veyrath showed her another path, the elves and humans working together, sharing knowledge and resources. Standing against the Voidborn as allies rather than strangers. It was a future where both species survived and grew stronger together, but it required someone to take the first step and defy centuries of tradition. Katie had been working on something in her lab, and now she burst into the command center with excitement. She had been studying the Voidborn ship parts that Calith had brought with her as samples. Using human scanning technology, she had discovered something amazing. The Voidborn ships had a weakness that Elven sensors had never detected, a specific frequency that disrupted their power systems. Melissa Gray arrived with more news. She was the lead scientist on New Terra, and she had been analyzing human brain chemistry. She believed that humans had a natural resistance to Voidborn mental attacks because of differences in their neural structure. With proper training, humans could potentially jam Voidborn telepathic weapons. Combined with Katie's technical discovery, it could change everything. Lisa made a decision. She said that regardless of what Calith chose to do, New Terra would prepare for the possibility of Voidborn attack. They would not sit idle while a threat loomed. She ordered Katie and Melissa to continue their research, and she began organizing combat training for volunteers. Humanity would be ready. Calith watched the humans spring into action and felt something she had not felt in a long time: hope. These people barely knew her, and they owed her nothing. Yet they were preparing to face a threat that might never come just because it was the right thing to do. She thought about her people who had centuries of wisdom and technology, but they lacked what humans had in abundance: the courage to do what was right instead of what was safe. She made her choice then. She would stay and help humanity prepare. She would share everything she knew about the Voidborn and their tactics. If the Dominion branded her a traitor, then so be it. Some things were more important than rank or status. Some things were worth fighting for, even if it meant losing everything else. Amy found her later in the cargo hold, sitting beside Veyrath. The dragon was recovering well and could probably fly again in another week. Amy sat down next to Calith, and they stayed in comfortable silence for a while. Finally, Amy asked if Calith was sure about her decision. Calith said she was more sure of this than anything she had done in her entire life. Veyrath rumbled his approval. Then he did something that shocked both women. He opened a telepathic link to Amy. Dragons rarely connected with anyone except their bonded riders, and never with other species. But Veyrath reached out to Amy and shared his gratitude and respect. He showed her images of the care she had given him and the kindness she had shown. He named her Soul Friend, and the bond settled into place. Amy gasped as she felt the connection form. Suddenly, she could sense Veyrath's emotions and thoughts. She felt his ancient wisdom and his deep affection for Calith. She also felt his conviction that humanity was something special, a species worth protecting and nurturing. She tried to ask what had just happened, but Veyrath simply sent her an image of a smile. Calith stared at them both in wonder. In 10,000 years, Veyrath had never chosen a second companion. Dragons bonded once, and that was all. But he had just declared Amy his soul friend, which was almost as deep as a rider bond. It was unprecedented. It was also a judgment. Dragons did not give such honor lightly. The implications were enormous. If other dragons learned that the first scale had chosen a human as worthy, it would shake the foundations of galactic society. Dragons were revered by every spacefaring species. Their choices mattered. And Veyrath had just declared that humans deserved the highest honor a dragon could give. Lisa called an emergency council meeting that night. Every department head attended along with Kalith and Amy. Lisa explained the situation clearly. They had intelligence about an enemy that threatened multiple species. They had potential allies who were too proud to ask for help. And they had a choice about how to proceed. The debate was intense. Some argued they should focus on defending New Terra and not get involved in galactic politics. Others said they had a moral obligation to help if they could. Katie pointed out that if the elves fell, humanity would face the Voidborn alone eventually. Melissa noted that cooperation could advance human science by centuries. In the end, they voted. It was unanimous. New Terra would offer alliance to the Elven Dominion. They would share their discoveries and train alongside Elven forces, and they would face the Voidborn together as equals, not subjects. Lisa would send the message in the morning. Kalith felt tears on her face and did not try to hide them. She had come seeking repairs for her ship and treatment for her dragon. Instead, she had found something far more precious. She had found people who saw worth in others and who chose courage over fear. She had found hope. The response from the Elven Dominion arrived 3 days later, and it was not what anyone had hoped for. Lisa read the message aloud to the council with Kalith standing beside her. The High Council rejected the offer of alliance and demanded that Kalith return immediately to face charges of treason. They also warned that any further contact between humans and elves would be considered a hostile act. Kalith had expected this, but it still hurt. Her own people had turned their backs on salvation because of pride. She told the council that she understood if they wanted to distance themselves from her now. She had brought them nothing but trouble and the threat of elven displeasure. But Lisa cut her off and said that New Terra did not abandon friends. The council voted again, and once more it was unanimous. Kalith could stay as long as she wanted. Veyrath was fully healed now and could fly again. He spent his days soaring over New Terra and marveling at the human colony. Sophie still visited him every day and had taught him several human children's songs that he hummed while flying. The sight of an ancient dragon humming nursery rhymes was something that made even the most serious people smile. But there was work to do. Katie had been reverse engineering Kalith weapons and combining them with human technology. The results were impressive. Human energy weapons were crude compared to elven designs, but they were also more powerful in raw output. By combining the precision of elven targeting systems with human firepower, they created something new and deadly. Rebecca Hayes led the combat training program. She was a colonel with 30 years of military experience, and she did not waste time. She drilled her volunteers relentlessly in anti-Voidborn tactics that Kalith provided. The humans learned quickly and adapted the strategies to fit their own strengths. Within 2 weeks, they had a fighting force that might actually stand a chance. Amy worked with Melissa on the mental resistance training. They discovered that humans could indeed resist Voidborn telepathic attacks with proper preparation. The key was a form of meditation that created mental barriers. It was not perfect, but it was better than being defenseless. Amy proved to be naturally talented at it and could maintain barriers for hours. Through her bond with Veyrath, Amy also gained access to dragon knowledge about the Voidborn. The ancient beings had fought them before millennia ago. Veyrath shared tactical information and warnings about Voidborn strategies. He told them that the enemy preferred psychological warfare and would try to turn allies against each other. Unity would be their greatest defense. 3 weeks after the Dominion rejection, long-range sensors detected a ship approaching New Terra. It was small and fast and broadcasting an elven identification code. Lisa ordered the station to battle readiness while Kalith tried to identify the vessel. Her face went pale when she recognized the signature. It was a Dominion hunter ship sent to retrieve her. The ship entered orbit and sent a single message: Commander Lyrian Starwind of the Elven Fleet demanded that Kalith surrender herself immediately. If she complied, she would face trial, but might receive mercy. If she resisted, the hunter ship was authorized to use lethal force. Lyrian gave her 1 hour to decide. Kalith knew Lyrian by reputation. She was a brilliant commander and absolutely loyal to the Dominion. She was also Kalith's cousin, though they had not spoken in 50 years. Lyrian would follow her orders without question and without mercy. There would be no reasoning with her. Lisa asked Kalith what she wanted to do. Kalith said she would surrender to protect New Terra from becoming a battlefield. But before she could contact the hunter ship, something unexpected happened. The entire human population of New Terra sent a message to the Elven ship. Over 10,000 voices spoke as one and said that Kalith was under their protection and they would not allow her to be taken. Lyrian responded with confusion and irritation. She did not understand why humans cared about one elven traitor. Lisa replied that Kalith was not a traitor, but a hero who had chosen to warn humanity about a threat, and New Terra protected its own. Lyrian gave them one warning: stand down or be destroyed. Katie had been working frantically during the exchange. She activated the new defensive grid she had been building for the past 2 weeks. It combined elven shield technology with human power generators, and the result was impressive. A shimmering barrier surrounded the entire station. Lyrian weapons fire splashed harmlessly against it. The hunter ship circled, looking for weaknesses, but Katie had done her job well. Lyrian sent another message, and this time she sounded genuinely curious. She wanted to know how humans had acquired elven shield technology. Lisa told her the truth. Kalith had shared it freely to help them defend themselves. That was what allies did. Lyrian demanded to speak with Kalith directly. The two elven women faced each other across the communications channel, and the tension was thick. Lyrian accused Kalith of betraying everything they stood for. Kalith replied that she had betrayed nothing except blind pride. The Dominion was dying, and Lyrian knew it. The accusation hung in the air. Lyrian's face showed cracks in her composure. Finally, she admitted what Kalith had suspected. The Dominion had lost 70% of its worlds to the Voidborn. They were evacuating entire star systems, and the High Council was in chaos. The Elven fleet could not hold much longer. They had months at most before complete collapse. Kalith asked why they would not accept help. Lyrian's voice was bitter when she replied. The High Council believed that accepting aid from younger species would destroy Elven culture and prestige. They would rather face extinction with their pride intact than admit they needed help. Some of the commanders disagreed, but they were outvoted. Lisa interrupted the conversation with a proposal. She invited Lyrian to come aboard New Terra under a flag of truce. She wanted to show the Elven commander what humans had accomplished in just 3 weeks. Perhaps seeing it firsthand would change her mind. Lyrian was silent for a long moment before agreeing. The hunter ship docked, and Lyrian came aboard with 2 guards. She was tall even for an elf, with silver hair bound in intricate braids and eyes that missed nothing. She wore the crimson armor of a high commander and moved with lethal grace. Her guards were equally impressive and watched the humans with suspicion. Lisa gave her the full tour. She showed Lyrian the training grounds where humans practiced anti-Voidborn tactics. She demonstrated the new weapons that combined Elven and human technology. She explained the mental resistance training and had Amy demonstrate her abilities. With each revelation, Lyrian's face showed more shock and grudging respect. Katie brought out her prize achievement. She had captured a Voidborn scout probe that had wandered into their system and reverse-engineered its communications array. Using the technology, they could potentially track Voidborn fleet movements. It was something the Elven military had been trying to do for years without success. Katie had done it in 2 weeks with spare parts and determination. Melissa showed Lyrian the neurological research proving human resistance to telepathic attacks. She had data from hundreds of volunteers, and the results were conclusive. Humans could be trained to withstand mental assaults that would cripple other species. Combined with proper tactics, this made them ideal soldiers against the Voidborn. But the moment that truly shocked Lyrian came when she met Veyrath. Dragons were legendary among elves, and seeing one in person left her speechless. Then Sophie ran up and hugged the dragon leg while chattering about her day at school. Veyrath listened patiently and made encouraging sounds. The sight of an ancient dragon befriending a human child broke something in Lyrian's carefully controlled expression. Veyrath spoke directly to Lyrian's mind, and she gasped. Dragons rarely communicated with anyone and never with strangers, but Veyrath wanted her to understand. He showed her visions of the future, both paths, one where pride led to extinction, another where cooperation led to survival and growth. He told her that he was the first scale, and his judgment was that humanity deserved to stand as equals. Lyrian dropped to one knee before Veyrath in a gesture of profound respect. When she rose, her face had changed. The rigid loyalty had been replaced by something else. Doubt and hope mixed together. She asked Lisa and Kalith if they truly believed this alliance could work. They both said yes without hesitation. That evening, Lyrian shared a meal with the council. She told them honestly about the Dominion situation and did not try to hide how desperate things had become. She said that seeing what humans had accomplished gave her hope, but also shame. Her people should have reached out long ago instead of clinging to outdated superiority. Katie asked a practical question. If the Elven Dominion refused to ally with humans, would individual commanders be allowed to cooperate? Lyrian said that the High Council claimed absolute authority, but their control was weakening. Many commanders were making their own decisions now that survival was at stake. She herself commanded a small fleet and could act with some independence. Lisa proposed an alternative plan. Instead of seeking official alliance, they would conduct joint operations. Lyrian fleet would work with new Terra forces to test the new tactics and technology. If they succeeded, the results would speak louder than any political debate. Other Elven commanders might follow their example once they saw proof. Lyrian agreed. She would take 6 ships and coordinate with new Terra defenses. They would start with patrol duties and gradually increase cooperation. She would send reports to sympathetic commanders in the Elven fleet, but not to the High Council. It was technically disobedience, but not outright rebellion. At least not yet. The real test came 2 days later when sensors detected a Voidborn scout ship at the edge of the system. It was small and alone, but it was scanning everything. If it reported back about the cooperation between humans and elves, the Voidborn would know their enemies were starting to work together. They needed to capture or destroy it before that happened. Lisa made a bold call. They would capture it intact. The intelligence they could gain from a functional Voidborn vessel would be invaluable. It was risky and difficult, but worth attempting. Lyrian argued that destroying it was safer, but she admitted that Lisa's plan had merit if they could pull it off. They assembled a strike team with both human and elven personnel. Rebecca would lead the humans, while Lyrian commanded the elves. Kalith volunteered to pilot a fighter since she knew Voidborn tactics. Amy surprised everyone by volunteering as well. Through her bond with Veyrath, she could provide telepathic jamming that might confuse the enemy. The plan was complex. The elven ships would herd the Voidborn vessel toward an ambush point. Human fighters would disable its engines with the new weapons. Then Amy, linked with Veyrath, would jam its communications and self-destruct systems. Finally, they would board and secure it. At least a dozen things could go wrong. They launched the operation at dawn. The elven ships moved into position with practiced precision. The Voidborn scout immediately tried to flee but found its escape routes blocked. Then the human fighters appeared and opened fire. Katie knew weapons worked perfectly. They sliced through the enemy shields and crippled the engines in seconds. Amy closed her eyes and reached out through her bond with Veyrath. The dragon was in orbit above them, and he channeled his power through their connection. Amy felt energy flood through her, and she directed it at the Voidborn ship. The telepathic jamming field she created was something no single being should be able to generate, but with Veyrath help it was possible. The Voidborn vessel went dark. Its communications failed, and its automated systems shut down. It drifted helplessly while the boarding team approached. Rebecca led her squad aboard with weapons ready. What they found inside was disturbing. The ship was run by biological computers that were part machine and part living tissue. It was grotesque and fascinating. They secured the vessel and towed it back to New Terra. The intelligence teams went to work immediately, and what they discovered was both encouraging and terrifying. The Voidborn were tracking the war through a network of scout ships like this one. By capturing it intact, they had broken a link in that network. The enemy would not know what happened here for weeks at least. More importantly, Katie found the navigation data. It showed Voidborn fleet positions and movement patterns. With this information, they could predict attacks and warn potential targets. It was exactly the advantage they needed. Lyrian immediately sent copies to trusted commanders in the Elven fleet. The celebration was brief because they all knew what came next. The captured ship would be missed. When the Voidborn realized it was gone, they would investigate. New Terra had just painted a target on itself, but they had also proven something important. Humans and elves could fight together and win. Lyrian prepared to depart with her fleet, but promised to return. She clasped arms with Lisa in a gesture of respect between warriors. She apologized to Calith for calling her a traitor and said that history would remember her differently. And she knelt before Veyrath one final time and thanked him for opening her eyes. As the elven ships left orbit, Calith stood with Amy and watched them go. She had defied her people and lost everything she knew, but she had also found something better, a future worth fighting for. Amy squeezed her hand, and through the bond with Veyrath, they all felt the same emotion. Hope. 2 weeks passed in relative peace, and New Terra used every moment to prepare. The captured Voidborn technology yielded secrets that changed everything they knew about the enemy. Katie worked 20-hour days reverse engineering systems and adapting them for defensive use. Melissa trained more volunteers in mental resistance until half the station could maintain basic telepathic shields. Rebecca drilled her combat teams until they could execute complex maneuvers in their sleep. She incorporated elven tactics with human aggression and created something unique. The soldiers learned to trust each other completely regardless of species. Humans and the few elves who had quietly joined them fought side by side. Calith received messages from old friends in the elven military. They were careful and coded, but the meaning was clear. Lyrian was not alone in questioning the High Council. More commanders were making independent decisions, and some were establishing quiet contact with human colonies. A rebellion was brewing, but it moved slowly and cautiously. Amy spent her time deepening her bond with Veyrath and learning to use it effectively. The dragon taught her ancient techniques for focusing mental energy. Together, they could create telepathic effects that neither could achieve alone. She was becoming something new. Not quite human anymore, but not dragon either, something in between. Sophie continued to visit Veyrath daily and seemed completely unaware that she was playing with one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy. She brought him drawings she made in school and told him stories about her friends. Veyrath treasured every moment, and his affection for the small human child was obvious to anyone who watched them. Then the alarms sounded. Long-range sensors detected multiple ships dropping out of hyperspace at the system edge. The signatures were Elven, but this was not Lyrian fleet. It was a full battle group with a flagship and support vessels. Lisa ordered the station to full alert while trying to establish communications. The response came in the form of a formal hail. High Commander Lyrian Starwind requested permission to approach New Terra under flag of truce. But this time, she was not alone. She brought 12 ships and over 3,000 personnel. Lisa granted permission while wondering what had changed. Lyrian came aboard with an entire delegation. She looked different from her last visit. The rigid loyalty had been replaced by determination and something that might have been excitement. She wasted no time with pleasantries. She told Lisa that everything had changed in the past 2 weeks and she needed to speak with the full council immediately. They assembled in the conference room and Lyrian laid out the situation. The intelligence from the captured Voidborn ship had been shared among sympathetic Elven commanders. When they saw proof that cooperation worked, they made a collective decision. They were forming a breakaway faction that would work with humanity regardless of High Council approval. Lisa asked how many commanders had joined this faction. Lyrian smiled for the first time since they had met. Over 40% of the remaining Elven fleet had quietly pledged support. They controlled nearly 200 ships and dozens of colonies. It was not a majority, but it was enough to matter. The High Council had discovered the rebellion and reacted with rage. They declared all participating commanders to be traitors and ordered their arrest. But they lacked the military power to enforce the order. The loyal forces were already stretched thin, fighting the Voidborn. A civil war would doom them all, and even the most proud council members knew it. So an unofficial truce had formed. The High Council ignored the rebels as long as they continued fighting the Voidborn. The rebels ignored the council and operated independently. It was a fragile arrangement, but it gave them breathing room, and it meant that Lyrian fleet could now operate openly from New Terra. Katie immediately began planning how to integrate the Elven ships with human defenses. The logistics were complicated but exciting. Between human industrial capacity and Elven technology, they could build a defensive network that would make New Terra one of the most protected systems in the region. Rebecca started organizing joint training exercises. 3,000 Elven soldiers would train alongside human forces. They would share knowledge and techniques and learn to function as a unified military. It was an ambitious project, but Rebecca thrived on challenges. Melissa gained access to Elven medical databases, and her research accelerated dramatically. She discovered that the mental resistance training could be enhanced with Elven meditation techniques. The combination was more effective than either approach alone. She projected that within a month, they could have 5,000 personnel with advanced telepathic defenses. But not everyone was happy about the changes. A faction of humans argued that they were getting too involved in galactic politics. They had come to New Terra to build a quiet life, not to fight alien wars. Lisa listened to their concerns and acknowledged them, but she also pointed out that the Voidborn would come eventually, whether they wanted involvement or not. The debate became heated during a colony-wide meeting. Some people accused Lisa of putting them all at risk. Others argued that helping the elves was the right thing to do. Still others pointed out the practical benefits of the alliance. The meeting went on for hours without clear resolution. Then Sophie stood up. The 5-year-old girl walked to the front of the room and asked to speak. Katie tried to stop her, but Sophie was determined. She climbed onto a chair so everyone could see her and spoke with the absolute conviction only a child could muster. She said that Veyrath was her friend, and friends helped each other. The elves needed help, and it did not matter that they were different or that some of them had been mean before. When people needed help, you helped them. That was what made you good. She sat down, and the room was silent. Lisa called for a vote. The colony would decide democratically whether to continue the alliance or ask the Elven forces to leave. It was a risk because democracy could go either way, but she trusted her people to make the right choice. The vote was not even close. 80% chose to continue the alliance. The real test came 3 days later. The sensors detected a massive energy signature approaching the system. It was much larger than any ship they had encountered before. Katie pulled up the readings and her face went pale. It was a void-born dreadnought with a fleet of support vessels. Over 70 ships total, and they were headed straight for New Terra. Lisa immediately sent out calls for help. Lyrian fleet was in system, but they only had 12 ships. Other human colonies were too far away to respond in time. They were facing overwhelming odds, and no one had illusions about their chances. But Lisa refused to order an evacuation. They would fight. Lyrian agreed without hesitation. Her ships moved into defensive formation around New Terra, while Katie activated every defensive system they had. Rebecca positioned her forces at strategic points throughout the station. Melissa made sure the telepathic resistance teams were ready. Everyone knew this might be their last day, but no one suggested surrender. Amy stood with Veyrath on the observation deck and watched the void-born fleet approach. Through their bond, she could feel the dragon ancient memories of fighting this enemy before. He had survived such battles in the past, but the odds had never been this bad. Still, he radiated determination and battle joy. He was ready. Kalith joined them, and they stood together in silence. The elf warrior had come to this system seeking repairs for her ship and healing for her dragon. Instead, she had found a new home and a cause worth dying for. If this was the end, then at least she would face it alongside people who mattered. Katie received a priority signal and shouted for Lisa attention. More ships were dropping out of hyperspace, but these signatures were elven. A fleet was arriving, and it was massive. Over 60 vessels with Lyrian personal flagship, the Moonblade, at the lead. The breakaway faction had come in force. Lyrian voice came over the communications channel, and it was filled with fierce pride. She announced that no commander in the faction would stand by while New Terra faced annihilation. They had all voted, and the decision was unanimous. They would fight together or die together, but they would not abandon their allies. The Voidborn fleet hesitated as the elven reinforcements took position. They had expected an easy target, and instead found a combined force ready to resist. The enemy fleet split into attack formations and began their assault. The battle for New Terra had begun. The first wave hit the defensive shields, and Katie systems held. Barely. The Voidborn weapons were designed to overwhelm defenses through sustained fire, and they were succeeding. Power levels dropped rapidly as the generators struggled to maintain the barriers. Katie rerouted everything she could, but it was not enough. Lyrian ships engaged the enemy fleet directly. Elven weapons were precise and deadly, and they took a toll on the attackers. But the Voidborn had numbers, and were willing to sacrifice ships to achieve their goals. For every enemy vessel destroyed, 2 more pressed forward. Rebecca forces launched from the station in fighters and small craft. They used hit-and-run tactics to harass the larger Voidborn ships. Human pilots proved to be naturally talented at the chaos of space combat. They were unpredictable and aggressive, and the enemy struggled to counter them. Amy and Veyrath reached out together and created a massive telepathic jamming field. It disrupted Voidborn coordination and prevented them from executing complex maneuvers. Enemy ships started making mistakes and firing on each other. The technique was working, but it required enormous energy, and Amy could feel herself being drained. The battle raged for hours. Both sides took heavy losses, but neither would yield. The space around New Terra filled with debris and the glow of exploding ships. Katie's shields failed in multiple sections, and the station took direct hits. Fires broke out and casualties mounted, but no one retreated. Then something changed. Amy felt it through her connection with Veyrath. The dragon was gathering power for something big. He asked her to trust him and to help channel everything he was about to do. She agreed without understanding and opened herself completely to their bond. Veyrath began to glow with golden light that grew brighter and brighter. He drew on reserves of power that he had been saving for 10,000 years. The energy built until it was almost unbearable. Then, with Amy as his focus, he released it all at once. A wave of pure force exploded outward from New Terra. It washed over the human and elven ships without harming them. But when it hit the Void-born fleet, the effect was devastating. Their telepathic control systems overloaded, their biological computers seized. Over half the enemy ships went dead in space. The remaining Void-born vessels broke formation and fled. They had never encountered resistance like this, and their programming could not cope with it. Lyrian fleet pursued and destroyed several more before letting the rest escape. The battle was over. Against all odds, they had won. Amy collapsed and would have fallen if Calith had not caught her. Veyrath's voice in her mind was weak but satisfied. He had done what needed to be done. The cost had been high, but they had survived. She thanked him through tears and told him he was the bravest being she had ever known. The casualty reports came in and they were sobering. New Terra had lost nearly a quarter of its defenders. The Elven fleet had lost 18 ships, but they had also destroyed or disabled 50 Void-born vessels. It was a victory that would be remembered. Lisa stood in the damaged command center and looked at the faces around her. Humans and elves working side by side to save lives and repair damage. This was what they had fought for. Not territory or resources, but the right to stand together. She thought about Sophie's words and smiled. When people needed help, you helped them. That was what made you good. The days after the battle were filled with grief and healing in equal measure. New Terra held memorial services for the fallen, and both humans and elves mourned together. Sophie brought flowers from the station gardens and placed them at the memorial wall where the names were being carved. She cried for people she had never met because they had died protecting her home. Veyrath recovered slowly from the massive energy expenditure. He had drawn on power that dragons were supposed to save for the end of their lives. Amy stayed by his side constantly, and their bond grew even deeper. She could feel his weariness, but also his contentment. He had made a difference when it mattered most, and that was worth any price. The victory at New Terra sent shockwaves through the galaxy. The news spread that a combined human and elven force had defeated a void-born dreadnought fleet. Other species began to take notice. If these two unlikely allies could win against such odds, then perhaps the Void-born were not invincible after all. More elven commanders joined the breakaway faction. Within weeks, over 60% of the surviving elven military had pledged to work with humanity. The High Council tried to maintain control, but their authority crumbled. They had led the elven people to the brink of extinction through pride, and now a different path was emerging. Human colonies across the sector began organizing their own defensive networks. They reached out to New Terra for guidance, and Katie found herself training engineers from a dozen different worlds. The technology and tactics developed in desperation were now being shared freely. A network of mutual defense was taking shape. Lyrian proposed something radical during a council meeting. She suggested formalizing the alliance between humans and elves with an actual treaty. Not a vague agreement, but a binding pact that would unite their peoples for mutual defense and cooperation. Lisa loved the idea but worried about the details. They spent weeks negotiating the terms. Both sides had concerns and requirements. The humans wanted assurance that they would be treated as equals, not subordinates. The elves needed guarantees that their culture and traditions would be respected. It was difficult work, but they were committed to finding solutions. Calith served as a mediator between the groups. Her unique position as an elf who had chosen humanity gave her credibility with both sides. She helped translate not just languages, but cultural expectations and fears. Slowly, the treaty took shape. The breakthrough came when Veyrath made a formal declaration. As the first scale, he had the authority to speak for all dragons. He announced that humanity had proven themselves worthy of dragon friendship and protection. Any dragon who wished could now bond with human companions without shame or restriction. The impact of this declaration was enormous. Dragons were revered across the galaxy, and their judgment carried immense weight. If the first scale said humans were worthy, then no one could claim otherwise. It undermined centuries of elven superiority and validated the new alliance. Within days, 3 more dragons arrived at New Terra. They had heard about Veyrath's choice and wanted to see these humans for themselves. They were younger than Veyrath, but still ancient by any measure. Amy found herself teaching them about human culture and introducing them to potential companions. One dragon named Ashira bonded with Rebecca. The warrior and the dragon were perfectly matched in temperament, and they formed a connection that seemed inevitable in retrospect. Another dragon called Theron chose Katie, and the engineer was absolutely delighted. The third dragon, Mira, spent her time with Melissa and the scientist. Sophie was heartbroken that she could not bond with a dragon yet. She was too young, and the process required mental maturity. But Veyrath promised her that when she was older, he would help her find the perfect dragon companion. Until then, she could visit him every day. Sophie accepted this with the resilience of childhood. The Elven High Council finally collapsed 6 weeks after the battle. The remaining council members were not arrested or punished. They were simply ignored as irrelevant. New leadership emerged from the military commanders who had chosen cooperation over pride. Lyrian was elected as the first High Commander of what they were now calling the Free Elven Collective. The treaty was finalized and ready for signing. Lisa insisted that it happen on New Terra because this was where the alliance had been born. Representatives came from dozens of human colonies and elven worlds. The ceremony was planned for the memorial garden that had been built to honor the fallen. The garden was beautiful. It combined elven and human plants in a design that represented unity. At the center stood a monument made from pieces of both human and void-born ships, destroyed in the battle. It was a reminder of what they had overcome together. Katie's daughter Sophie had convinced the adults to let her plant a special tree. She chose a sapling from Earth and one from the elven homeworld. She planted them side by side and declared that they would grow together and become stronger that way. The symbolism was not lost on anyone. The day of the treaty signing arrived and people gathered from across the station. The ceremony was broadcast to every allied world. Lisa and Lyrian stood before the crowd in their respective uniforms. They had come so far from that first tense meeting months ago. Lisa spoke first. She talked about the journey that had brought them here, a wounded elf and a dying dragon seeking help. A human colony that chose compassion over caution. Battles fought and won through cooperation. She said that the treaty they were signing was not just a political agreement, but a promise to stand together against any threat. Lyrian spoke next. She admitted that elves had been wrong to reject humanity based on pride. She said that her people had learned a hard lesson about the price of arrogance. But they had also learned something beautiful about the strength found in friendship across species. She promised that elves would never again stand alone when they could stand with allies. Calith and Amy stood as witnesses to the signing. The 2 women who had formed the first true friendship between their species watched as their leaders made it official. Amy reached out through her bond with Veyrath, and the dragon sent feelings of joy and approval to everyone present. The treaty was signed, and the crowd erupted in celebration. Humans and elves embraced, and some people cried happy tears. Musicians from both species began playing, and the music blended together into something new. Children ran through the garden laughing while their parents talked about the future with hope. But the celebration was interrupted by an alert from the sensor station. Multiple ships were approaching, but the signatures were unknown. They were not void-born, and not any species in the database. Lisa ordered a defensive formation while trying to establish communication. The lead ship responded with a message that shocked everyone. They were representatives of the Corlani Confederation. a species that had been fighting the Voidborn for generations. They had heard about the victory at New Terra and wanted to meet the people who had achieved what they thought impossible. More species made contact over the following weeks. The Thrin Empire, the Collective of Free Worlds, the nomadic clans. All of them had been fighting isolated battles against the Voidborn. All of them wanted to learn about the human and elven alliance. The network of cooperation began to spread beyond 2 species. Within 3 months, an unprecedented coalition was forming. Over 20 different species pledged to work together against the Voidborn threat. They shared intelligence and resources. They coordinated their fleets. For the first time in recorded history, the galaxy was uniting. The Voidborn responded to this new threat with increased aggression. They launched attacks on multiple fronts, trying to break the coalition before it solidified. But every attack was met with combined resistance. The Allied forces had learned to fight together, and their coordination improved with each battle. Amy became known as the Dragon Speaker. Her unique bond with Veyrath and her ability to facilitate connections between humans and dragons made her invaluable. She traveled to different worlds, helping form new bonds and teaching the techniques she had learned. Katie was appointed Chief Engineer of Allied Technologies. She led teams from multiple species in developing new weapons and defensive systems. The combination of different technological approaches yielded innovations that no single species could have achieved alone. Rebecca commanded the first integrated military unit with personnel from 7 different species. They trained together and fought together and became a symbol of what the Alliance represented. Other units began forming, and the coalition military grew stronger every month. Melissa made breakthroughs in medical science by combining knowledge from multiple species. Treatments that had been impossible became routine. Life expectancy across the coalition began to increase. She worked particularly on countermeasures against Voidborn biological weapons. Lyrian served as the supreme commander of Allied forces. She coordinated the military efforts of dozens of species and proved to be a brilliant strategist. Under her leadership, the coalition went from defensive to offensive operations. They began taking back worlds that had been lost. Lisa remained the administrator of New Terra, which had become the de facto capital of the Alliance. The small colony that had once been a backwater was now one of the most important locations in the galaxy. She managed the logistics and politics with the same practical wisdom she had always shown. Kalith founded the diplomatic corps that helped different species understand each other and resolve conflicts. She had learned through painful experience that pride and misunderstanding could be as dangerous as any enemy. Her work prevented dozens of potential problems. Veyrath spent his days teaching younger dragons and bonding with Sophie, who visited him constantly. He knew his time was limited. The massive energy expenditure during the battle had shortened his remaining lifespan significantly, but he had no regrets. He had seen the future he wanted and helped make it real. 2 years after the first treaty signing, the coalition launched a major offensive against the Voidborn core territories. Over 500 ships from 20 species worked together in perfect coordination. The campaign lasted 6 months and ended with the destruction of the main Voidborn production facilities. The war was not over, but the tide had turned decisively. The Voidborn were being pushed back on every front. Worlds were being liberated. Refugees were returning home. Hope had replaced despair. Sophie was 7 years old now, and she still visited Veyrath every day. She could tell that the ancient dragon was fading. His movements were slower, and he slept more often. But when she was with him, he was always alert and attentive. She told him stories and brought him drawings and sang him songs. One evening, Veyrath asked Sophie to gather everyone important. He said it was time for goodbyes. Amy felt it through their bond, and her heart broke. She sent messages to Lisa and Kalith and Lyrian and everyone who mattered. They assembled in the memorial garden where Veyrath had requested to be. The ancient dragon lay peacefully among the flowers that Sophie had planted. His scales still shimmered with faint golden light, but it was dimming. He spoke to them all through telepathy because he wanted everyone to hear his final words. He told them that he had lived for 10,000 years and seen empires rise and fall. He had witnessed beauty and horror and everything between. But the past 2 years with them had been the most meaningful of his entire existence. They had shown him that different species could become family. He said that he was the first scale, and his judgment would echo through dragonkind for generations. He declared that humanity was not just worthy of respect, but of love. The same for elves who had learned humility, and for all the species who had chosen cooperation over isolation. He looked at Amy with affection that transcended species. She had been his soul friend and companion. Through their bond, he had experienced humanity in a way no dragon ever had before. He thanked her for the gift of her friendship and told her she would do great things. He turned to Sophie and made her a promise. When the time came, he would be reborn as all dragons eventually were. And in his next life, he would wait for her to find him. They would bond properly then, and she would become a dragon rider, like Calith. He just needed her to be patient. Sophie hugged his massive head and cried. She told him she loved him and would wait forever if needed. Veyrath made a sound like a purr and wrapped his wing gently around the small girl. He told her to be brave and kind and to never stop bringing people together. As the sun set over New Terra, Veyrath closed his eyes for the last time. His breathing slowed and then stopped. The golden light faded completely. The first scale had passed from the world, leaving behind a legacy that would change the galaxy. They held a memorial service that lasted 3 days. Representatives from every allied species attended. They shared stories about Veyrath and what he had meant to them. They celebrated his life and mourned his passing. When it was over, they built a statue of him in the garden where he had died. The war continued, but the coalition had momentum now. Year by year, they pushed the Voidborn further back. New species joined the alliance. Technology advanced. Understanding deepened. The future that Veyrath had shown them was becoming reality. 10 years after that first desperate arrival at New Terra, Calith stood in the memorial garden with Amy and Lisa. They were older now, with streaks of gray in their hair. But they were still friends and still working together for the alliance they had built. Sophie ran up to them. She was 17 now and training to become a diplomat like Calith. She was also waiting patiently for the day when Veyrath would return. Dragon rebirth could take decades, but she was determined to find him when it happened. They looked at the statue of Veyrath and remembered everything they had been through, the fear and pain and loss, but also the joy and triumph and love. They had come seeking repairs and found far more. They had found purpose and family and a future worth fighting for. Lisa spoke softly. She said that sometimes she still could not believe how much had changed. A single wounded ship arriving at their station had altered the course of history. Amy replied that it was not the ship that mattered, but the choices they made after. They could have turned Calith away. They could have refused to get involved, but they chose compassion, and that made all the difference. Calith placed her hand on the statue. She said that she had been sent to evaluate humanity and determine if they were useful. What she found instead was that they were necessary. Not because of their weapons or technology, but because of who they were, their ability to see past differences and find common ground. Sophie added her own thought. She said that Veyrath had taught her something important. Being strong meant being brave enough to ask for help and wise enough to offer it. That was what the Alliance represented. Billions of beings choosing to stand together. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the twin trees that Sophie had planted years ago. They had grown tall and strong with branches intertwined, the elven tree and the earth tree supporting each other and creating something beautiful together. The sun was setting, and the garden was bathed in golden light. In the distance, they could see ships from a dozen species docked at the station. People of all kinds walking together and working toward common goals. It was not perfect and challenges remained, but it was good. Amy smiled and looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, the Voidborn still lurked. But they were not alone anymore. The galaxy had learned to stand together, and that was a force more powerful than any weapon. Kalith had come seeking repairs for her ship. She had found something far more valuable. She had found a home,